Denton. I'm going to introduce Wilma Subra in just a moment here. It's a real honor, and it's a privilege to have her here, so I'll turn the floor over to her. I just want to take 2 minutes here to set the context of why I think this is so important for Denton. My name is Adam Briggle. I'm a faculty fellow here at the Center for the Study of Interdisciplinarity. I'm in the Philosophy and Religion Studies Department. I'm also the chair of a citizens advisory group called the Denton Stakeholders Drilling Advisory Group, or DAG. This is our blog here. We produced a report. We've been holding public meetings like this. In fact, this is the fourth one. One note I wanted to get out there, put it on your calendars, April 26th, the DAG will be hosting a mayoral debate between all three mayoral candidates on drilling policy. And that will be here in this building, but the room on the other opposite side. Yes, talk to me afterwards if you want more details. It'll be 7 to 9 p.m. in this building, April 26th. The other thing I want to mention by way of context, we are, many of you know, in the midst of revising our drilling and production ordinance. There is an official city gas drilling task force which continues to have ongoing meetings weekly, Monday nights, City Hall, 6 to 8 p.m. They are getting close to wrapping up. Vicki, I just talked to Vicki. I saw you. We just spoke. You were estimating 2 or 3 more meetings.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. It's important, though, to stay involved in the process, I think, from a citizen's perspective. Because it's going to go then to staff. My understanding will then produce a draft ordinance which will come back to the task force. We'll go to city council. We'll be opened up for public input. And so hopefully we'll have more chances to get involved with that, but we need to stay on top of it. Okay, now to Wilma Subra. Ms. Subra has degrees in microbiology and chemistry from the University of Southwestern Louisiana. She lives in Louisiana still, in New Iberia. We were just talking about that. I'm heading out there for spring break. She received the MacArthur Fellowship Genius Award from the MacArthur Foundation for doing what she does best, which is helping ordinary citizens understand, cope with, and combat environmental issues in their communities, helping them understand the science and how they can be effective in the political process too. What else to say? I also want to mention Sharon Wilson is here, who is the point person for the Earthworks Oil and Gas Accountability Project. Sharon, I was going to put your website up here in your blog. And Wilma sits on, if I've got this right, the Earthworks board. Right, okay. So that's an important connection to note. Here's Earthworks. I pulled up their mission statement so that you could see that. Ms. Subra started in 1981 the Subra Company, which is a chemistry lab and environmental consulting firm in New Iberia. She provides technical assistance to citizens across the U.S. and in some foreign countries who are concerned with the environment. She combines technical research and evaluation for them. And then she presents it to the community members so that they can strategize about how to engage in their local struggles. She's also been involved on the federal level in an important way. Mentioned some positions that she's held. She's just completed a 7-year term as the vice chair of the Environmental Protection Agency's National Advisory Council for Environmental Policy and Technology, and a 5-year term on the National Advisory Committee of the U.S. Representative to the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. This is my daughter, Gracie. Hey, did you have a question? I forgot to mention her. Gracie's here. She's helping me. Very good. Last thing I want to mention, what I find perhaps the coolest about what Ms. Subra has been doing in her esteemed career is she served a 6-year term on the EPA National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And so clearly she's had a lot of experience, has a wealth of knowledge. She's very generously offered to take some of her limited time to visit with us and share what she's got to say. And so please join me in welcoming her. And I'll pull, which one was it? This one. Yeah. Okay. Take it away. Thank you.
So thank you for having me here. As he told you, I provide technical assistance to community groups, and I've been dealing with oil field waste and oil and gas drilling and production activities since the 1970s, helping the citizens understand what is going on in their communities so that they can make decisions on what they want to happen in their community. So I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the oil and gas waste issues and how they are regulated. The first thing is that waste is non-hazardous. And if you talk to anyone in the industry, they'll tell you over and over again, our waste is non-hazardous. It's from the drilling and production activities. The Solid Waste Disposal Act of 1980 prohibited EPA from regulating drilling fluids, produced water, and other waste associated with exploration, development, and production of crude oil and natural gas as RCRA or hazardous waste. Backing up, that produced water is what has also captured the flowback water that we'll be talking about in a little while. So it prohibited EPA from regulating it as hazardous. Therefore, oil and gas goes under the non-hazardous waste issues. And it's combined into a large volume waste, which is produced water, drilling fluids, and drilling cuttings. And backing up, produced water now includes flowback water. And it's non-hazardous, but if you analyze it, 10 to 70% of it analyzes as hazardous. So if you're in the industry, if you're in the refining industry or the petrochemical industry, or you manufacture hazardous material, you know that you analyze it, and if it meets a certain criteria, it's hazardous and has to be handled and disposed of as hazardous. But because of that exemption, it's non-hazardous. So 10 to 70% is hazardous if you analyze. And then there's the associated waste, which is completion fluids, production storage tank sludges, oil sands and solids, pit sludges, and wastewater from tank cleaning facilities. And again, it's non-hazardous, but if you analyze it, 40 to 60% analyzes as hazardous, but, quote, it continues to be non-hazardous. So then, a number of years ago, the shale gas development started in the United States as well as a number of foreign countries. Shale is a formation that's very deep, that has a lot of natural gas in it, and in the Eagle Ford it has a lot of oil in it. Very deep meant it was too expensive to spend the money to drill the wells when natural gas prices were very low. The industry knew it was there. They did all the seismic testing, not an issue. It was just too deep and too expensive to go after. Natural gas prices went up, and it became more economically viable to go after this deep shale formation gas. Today, we have natural gas prices down almost to nothing. But the gas industry has the leases on this property, and they have so many years to drill a well, or else they lose the lease. So they are being forced to go out and drill the wells, and in a lot of cases, they're not having to produce the wells, but shut in the wells to comply with the lease requirements. And it has gotten to the point that there is so much excess natural gas that the liquefied natural gas import facilities, and in Louisiana we have 2 and a number additional ones that have been proposed. You have one here in Texas right on the Sabine River on the border of Louisiana and Texas, and the one on the Sabine River has actually proposed and has been awarded a contract to export the gas. So all of this natural gas that is being produced in excess will then be exported to foreign countries. So when you hear at the national level we want to be energy independent, suddenly we are looking at exporting a large amount of this natural gas that comes from the shale gas development. So this hydraulic fracturing fluids are used to frack each well and contain 60 to 160 tons of chemicals. So this is the fracturing fluid that once it goes down the well and fracks open the formation, when it comes back, It's called flowback fluid, and it's now in the same category as produced water, non-hazardous, but it contains 60 to 160 tons of chemicals. And here are some of the chemicals. Surfactants, lauryl sulfate. The industry will tell you, oh, it's just like Dawn dishwashing detergent. Friction reducers to make that material go down the well and not impact the casing very much and go into the formation. Then you have biocides to kill the bacteria. And so these are some of the chemicals that are in the biocides. And it's to pasteurize, not sterilize, but kill the organisms so they don't start building up on all of the tubing and the packers and all. Scale inhibitors, so it's ethylene glycol and a number of acid chemicals to stop the scale from building up on the piping. Corrosion inhibitors, and here you see some of the chemicals. Ion control, breakers, and then there's propping agent. So once you go in and fracture this very dense formation, you have to keep it open so that the gas can flow back. So you put an agent to prop it open, prop the cracks open. For the most part, it's sand, and the sand particles go in and hold it open. In Louisiana and New Iberia, we have a facility that makes what they call ceramic propping agents, which are ceramic beads with a large number of very toxic heavy metals. So if they move from just sand to these ceramic beads, then you have this other source of contamination in the formations. So then we look at flowback. It goes down under pressure, cracks open the formations, props it open with sand or ceramic, and then some of the material flows back to the surface along with the natural gas that's flowing through these cracks. And the flowback material has contaminated with things in the formation and also with naturally occurring radioactive materials such as radium-226. In the Marcellus and the Barnett Shale, from 20% to 100% in the Eagle Ford Shale of the flowback water is estimated to remain underground. So in the Eagle Ford, almost 100% stays underground with all of those chemicals in them. Marcellus and Barnett, about 20 stays underground. Some of it comes back over time. So this produced water is what we usually call produced water in normal oil and gas activity. It has a lot of salt. It has a lot of volatile organic chemicals, benzene, known human cancer-causing agent, ethylbenzene, toluene, semi-volatiles such as phenol, pyridine, which are known and suspected to cause cancer, birth defects, genetic impacts, a whole host of toxic heavy metals. So the produced water then starts coming to the surface when the gas starts coming to the surface, and the entire time gas is being produced, you're also producing large quantities of produced water. The produced water is contaminated with those materials I just showed you, sulfur compounds, the naturally occurring radioactivity, 226, radium-228, uranium, salt water. The volatile chemicals and the toxic heavy metals are known and possible cancer-causing agents. The radium is a bone seeker. It's a known cancer-causing agent, and it causes lung and bone cancer. So now that we have all these chemicals that we're put in the environment, we put it down the well, some of it's come back, it's in tanks on the site, it's being released. Let's look at how people in the area of shale gas development are being exposed. Inhalation and dermal exposure and absorption from the air emissions. If any of you have been to the community of Dish, you smell it, you taste it, you're being exposed, you're inhaling it, and then when it touches your skin, you're absorbing it. The natural gas produced is methane and its associated hydrocarbons and condensates. The condensate contains extremely toxic volatile chemicals. Benzene, known human cancer-causing agent, causes leukemia in children. Xylene, toluene, ethylbenzene, other possible cancer-causing agents, and the sulfur-based compounds, so that results in the rotten egg smell. These chemicals are released into the air during production, during the separation process, from tank storage, and from pipeline transportation. So let's just say you don't have a well in your backyard or near you, but the pipeline suddenly is coming through your yard. And the pipeline stations or compressor stations along the pipelines are sources of this air emission. So you don't have to be right by a well, right by the pad. You can be by some of the other infrastructure that is required in order for these wells to produce and get the natural gas to market. Pathways of exposure start with emissions into the air from produced water tanks on the production sites. So when we start talking a little later about the ordinances you're putting in, you need to be asking, where are the produced water tanks going to be on the site? And will they have vapor recovery systems, or will they vent into the air? The toxic volatile organic chemicals and the sulfur compounds come out of these water tanks. The natural gas is vented to the air, especially when you do the first well on a pad. You don't put in the pipeline because you want to be sure you're going to hit. So the first well is put in, it's fracked, and natural gas starts flowing to the surface, and you don't have a pipeline to put it in to take it for distribution, so you vent it into the air or you flare it. And so the people living in the area around are inhaling the methane and all the associated chemicals that go with the natural gas production. The compressors and the motors on the drilling site and production sites, huge quantities of emissions come from those. Injection wells where the waste is disposed of. And we in Louisiana have shale gas along the northern part near Shreveport, along I-20, and we send all of our flowback and produced water to you in Texas because we don't have a good formation to inject it in. And Texas is more than happy to have it because that's an economic bonus to the state. You look at all of the hydrocarbons that degrade the air quality. The people that live in these communities have their quality of life degraded substantially. The combustion products also combine with the volatile organic chemicals in the presence of heat and sunlight to produce ground level ozone. And a lot of these areas in this area of Texas are in ozone non-attainment. And you talk about autos as a source of ozone, you talk about the refineries and the petrochemical plants, but very little discussion about the production and drilling sites that cause emissions into the air that combine and cause ozone. Out west, we have huge ozone non-attainment areas during the middle of winter from the oil and gas drilling and production. So that's another thing. If you're very sensitive, you have respiratory problems, suddenly you find you're having ozone elevated levels in your community, and you're breathing real hard, and you've got a rattly chest, and you're feeling that you just can't make it to the next room. That's the ozone associated with this. So then we look at another pathway of exposure is ingestion and dermal absorption. You're going to eat it. Groundwater, surface water, you're going to drink it. When those resources are contaminated, you ingest it. You also take a bath or a shower, so you have the dermal exposure. I've been working in Pavilion, Wyoming. They have contaminated groundwater. And the Agency for Toxic Substance, in cooperation with the Environmental Protection Agency, said that they had so much toxics and methane in their water that when they washed clothes or ran the dishwasher or washed dishes or took a shower or took a bath, they needed to vent, either open the window or put the vent fan on, because it was an explosive situation and a toxic situation. So what you don't want is to live in an explosive or a toxic situation as a result of shale gas development. So then you have spills and leaks from pits, tanks, rigs, chemical storage containers, drums, flow lines, pipelines, mixing vats, trucks, and injection wells. This all comes to you as a result of shale gas development. And the industry admits that they have huge number of spills and leaks. And those spills and leaks contaminate surface water resources and shallow groundwater resources. So there will be pads that will be contaminated for a very long time just based on the spills and the leaks that occur. And in some states, road spreading is allowed to keep the dust down. And what you want to be sure of is when you're on a haul road or near a haul road that all these trucks are going into the shale gas development, you want to be sure that they're not wetting down that road with produced water. You want to be sure they're wetting down that road with clean water. If not, you're going to be exposed through that method. And then you have untreated and improperly treated produced water and flowbacks going into wastewater treatment plants. The city of Pittsburgh uses the water from the river for drinking. Up above Pittsburgh, a number of wastewater sewer treatment plants took flowback water and were paid to take it, and the treatment of the sewer plant had no impact on the chemicals. So the chemicals from the flowback water just went right through the plant, untreated, discharged into the river, and when it got to Pittsburgh, they took that in as raw water. They chlorinated it or used chloramine and formed all kind of chloroform, known cancer-causing agents, that they distributed in their water system to all the community of Pittsburgh. And so if you're not watching where the waters are going, the flowback and the produced water, it may be coming back to your community at your faucet. So here are the acute health impacts. Acute means short-term, right away. You're exposed to it, and you start reacting. That are experienced by people living in close proximity to shale gas, drilling, fracturing, produced waters. And this is produced wells, and this is the air pathway. Irritation to the skin, eyes, nose, throat, and lung. Headaches, dizziness, lightheaded, nausea, vomiting, skin rashes, fatigue. Tension and nervous. Personality changes, depression and anxiety. Irritability, confusion, drowsiness, weakness, muscle cramps, irregular heartbeat. So if tomorrow you had one of those health impacts and you live near shale gas development, you would go to your doctor, and would you tell him where you lived, and would you tell him what chemicals you may be exposed to, or would you just go in for treatment for your symptoms? And would the doctor ask you the questions, what have you been exposed to, where do you live, or will the doctor merely treat you for the symptom? That becomes an issue. Most of the medical physicians are not equipped to deal with toxic exposure, and frequently they just try and treat the symptom and don't ask what is causing the symptom, where it may have come from, and what are the results of it. So these types of health symptoms can visit your neighborhood. Yesterday, Sharon and I met with TCEQ and the Environmental Protection Agency over the community members living around Argyle Central, which is a facility that takes in produced water and separates it from the natural gas and puts the natural gas in the Mockingbird pipeline and then stores the natural gas on site. The air emissions from that facility are impacting the citizens living all around it. They can tell you which way it's worse when the wind blows in which direction. And their stories of all their health impacts are just absolutely heartbreaking. They lived there way before the facility was constructed. It went online in October of 2010. Their whole quality of life is just totally destroyed. Their health impacts are severe and ongoing. And right now, they have no choice either to live there or walk away from the investment they have and try and make a new start. So then chronic, long-term exposure. Let me just tell you that they frack a well, and it may take a couple of weeks, may take a little less, and then they put a number of wells on the pad. So over a year's period, they're continuing to frack the new wells on the pad. Production decreases something like 80% in the first year, gas production. So at that time, they usually have to come back in and start fracking again. So they will be fracking all the wells that they did the follow-up frack. So when they tell you, oh, well, we'll just be out here a couple of months, and then it's just going to be a Christmas tree or structures that won't impact you, they're going to be there a long time. So we're talking chronic exposure, long-term exposure. Damage to the liver and the kidneys, the lungs, the nervous system causing weakness, leukemia, aplastic anemia, changes in blood cells, impacts to the blood clotting mechanism. When I did some health surveys, and this is one that I did in the community of Dish, I did air sampling, correlated the chemicals in the air with their health impacts, did health surveys of the community, and correlated the health impacts that were being experienced by the community back with the chemicals that were being released into the air. The most prevalent was respiratory impacts. 81% of the people surveyed had respiratory impacts. Memory loss, 56%. We're experiencing a lot of people with memory loss as a result of the BP spill. But the interesting thing is that if you interview one person in a family that has memory loss, they won't tell you. But if you interview the spouse, she'll go like, every time I ask him to do something, he never remembers. So you know what we started doing? Writing notes. And the whole house is plastered with notes so he can look at the notes and see what I asked him to do. But you don't hear that when the patients go into the doctor because they don't know that they're having memory loss, and the spouse is the one that recognizes it the most. So here we have feelings of weak and tired, throat irritation, sinus problems, high blood pressure, muscle aches and pains, forgetfulness, recall problems, breathing difficulties, eye burning, joint pain, decrease in vision, sleep disorders. So if you come down with any one or number of these health symptoms and you go to the doctor, is the doctor going to ask you what they've been exposed to? Are you going to tell the doctor immediately what you think you're being exposed to based on where you live or where you work or where you go to school or where your children go to school? All of this is very important for the community to know and understand so you can understand the whole situation and react appropriately. So health impacts experienced by individuals living in close proximity to shale gas. 25% of the individuals surveyed had the following impacts: nasal irritation, arthritis, persistent indigestion, increased fatigue, frequent urination, extreme drowsiness. 25% of the individuals had difficulty in concentrating, inability to recall numbers, ringing in the ears, difficulty hearing, severe headaches, tingling in the hands, reduced muscle strength, loss of sexual drive, and people don't talk about that. So let's look at the health impacts reported by communities members living 50 feet to 2 miles. And over again, I've been doing interviews since I've been here for the last couple of days, and a lot of the people ask, well, how far of a setback should we have? Well, these are the health impacts that are reported from people living from 50 feet to 2 miles. So this says that 2 miles is not enough. Out 2 miles, we're still getting impacts. 61% of the health impacts associated with chemicals presented excess of short and long-term health impacts. That means TCEQ has limits, and the air emissions at these facilities that we monitored, 61% of those emission chemicals were over TCEQ's accepted level. Those 61% over TCEQ's accepted levels are the ones with the asterisks. Nasal irritation, throat irritation, eyes burning, frequent nausea, sinus problems, bronchitis, and it goes on and on and on. So the chemicals are there, they are known health impacts, and that's the health impacts the citizens are being experienced. And when you ask the citizens about odor and symptom events, they say they occur on a frequent basis. So you have a normal level of emissions going on, and then you have an upset condition, or you lose electricity and the compressor stops and restarts. And so those are events, or odor events. So on top of the normal emissions, then you have those other peak events. Goes on, weakness and tiredness, ringing in the ears, depression, falling, staggering, severe anxiety, lesions on the skin. So these health symptoms are real. These are being experienced by people in the shale gas area. These are not made up health impacts. These are really being experienced by the people in the area. So when we look at the most prevalent medical conditions for individuals living in close proximity to compressor stations and metering stations, these are along pipelines. These are not at the well pad. These are along pipelines. And you may have a compressor station that springs up in your neighborhood because of a well pad further away. So when you look at the compressor station and metering station, the medical conditions, 71% have respiratory impacts. 58% have sinus, 55% have throat, allergies, weakness, and fatigue, 52% have eye irritation. And it goes on, 48% has nasal, 45% has joint pain, 42% has muscle aches, all the way down to 39% with severe headaches, sleep disturbance, swollen and painful joints. Does this sound like a condition that you would like to live in with these kind of health impacts? These are the things that you need to know what's going on so you can try and protect your health and the health of your neighbors and your children and your family. So when we look at the compressor station and the gas metering stations, what do they have as units that release emissions into the air? They have the compressor engines, the compressor blowdown, the condensate tanks. And if those condensates don't have vapor recovery, everything is vented into the air. They have storage tanks. Then they have truck loading racks, where the trucks come in and take the heavily concentrated condensates off-site in their trucks. They have glycol dehydration units, which release huge quantities of benzene. And in a lot of the states that have oil and gas facilities, along gas pipelines, they have glycol dehydration units, and we have clusters of leukemia near those glycol dehydration units because of the release of benzene into the air. We have amine units that are used to clean up the gas. We have separators, and then we have just fugitive emissions. Everywhere where there's a joint or a flange, it leaks. From the day they put it in, it leaks. And as it wears, it leaks more and more. So when you see pipes and connectors, you have to remember every one of those at the joint leaks. So 90% of the individuals report experiencing odor events from these facilities. 90% of the community report odor events. So then we look at the health effects experienced by community members living near a natural gas storage and processing tank farm. Acute health effects, the same ones you hear: irritating skin, eyes, nose, mouth, throat, and lungs, headache, dizziness, lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, and the chronic or long-term anemia, cancer, and leukemia. So that does not speak well for the long-term exposure of the people living near these types of facilities. So then we look at groundwater, chemicals that are detected in the water associated with shale gas. And a lot of discussion's been going on about groundwater contamination. So these are the chemicals that have been detected in groundwater as a result related back to shale gas drilling, production, and distribution. The petroleum hydrocarbons, the chlorides, the nitrates, 2-butoxyphosphate, dimethylphosphate, methane, fluoride, nitrite, arsenic, bisphenol A. All of these chemicals we've determined as a result of groundwater contaminations. What are the chemicals detected in the air from shale gas drilling and production? Number one, benzene, known human cancer-causing agent. 1,3-butadiene, whole host of disulfide and sulfur compounds. Diethylbenzene, ethylbenzene, ethylene, ethylene oxide, naphthalene, known and suspected cancer-causing agents, genetic impacts, chronic exposure chemicals. All of these have been detected in the air. So the chemicals detected in the air with shale gas drilling and production: xylene, ethyl, ethane, isobutane, methane. It goes on. And again, sulfur dioxide. I spent last week in a community in Arkansas that lived near a paper mill that had huge quantities of sulfur dioxide released into the air. And in the week I was there, the wind changed a number of times based on the weather fronts, and different parts of the community were being exposed based on the wind. The sulfur dioxide is very heavy, very dense, sinks down, moves into people's houses, and when the wind is really, really strong, it moves because it's very, very heavy and takes wind to transport it. So what happens in a community when proposed shale gas? Some of the local cities or counties, or as in Louisiana, parishes, decide they want to do something. So you saw the exemption at the federal level that the states could not regulate it as oil field waste as hazardous. So there are a few overarching programs at the federal level, but most of the regulation of drilling and production is in the state. Often in Texas, it's the Railroad Commission. It's usually the conservation commissions in states. Their number one authority is to develop the resource. They are there to grant permits to develop the oil and the gas resources. And as a side issue, they deal with regulating the activity and looking out for what needs to be on the books to deal with the drilling and the waste. In the case of shale gas, it came on really fast because the price of natural gas went up. As a result, the states were just hit with huge numbers of applications for permits. They started taking the field staff and bringing them into the central office to review and write permits. There was few people left out in the field to do inspections and enforcement. And the more the shale gas grew, the more people you needed writing permits and the fewer people you had in the field doing enforcement and inspections. And in Texas, it's still that way. If you're going to do it appropriately, you need enough people to do appropriate review of the permit applications, not review them in 10 minutes and sign off on it. And you definitely need people in the field enforcing the regulations. But at the local level, you cannot regulate how the drilling is done. You can regulate how the activity impacts you in the community. You can regulate siting, setback requirements, zoning. So that if you want to develop some ordinances, you can say you can't put a well within X number of feet of a home, a church, a school, a hospital. You can do things like, I encourage when they're developing ordinances that you need to ask for the full picture. You don't want to say, apply for one well on this pad and the city or the county grants a permit. That city or county needs to say how many wells are going to be on that pad, where they're going to be located, where the compressors are going to be, how far the compressors are going to be from everything. Will they be a pit? What kind of water are you going to use for this fracking fluid? Because once you use this water in fracking, it's wasted from the water cycle forever. Where are you going to dispose of this water? Where are the haul roads? Where are the pipelines going? So that you may not have the well at your house, but he may have the pipeline going through his front yard or his backyard. And so he has a right to know that if the city or the county grants a permit for that well, that he's going to be getting the pipeline in his yard. All of those things need to be available to the city or the county when they make a decision whether or not to grant a permit for that well. So what happens when you come up with a good set of ordinances? You have a requirement that you can apply for a variance. So a gas company comes in and they apply for 20 variances with the one permit. And so the community gets out there and gets involved and testifies at the public hearing, and the zoning committee or the council decides to only grant 2 of the variances and not the others. And they decide to grant the permit for the well minus all those variances. The gas company comes back and says, we're going to sue you for the variances you didn't grant us. So then the legal division of the governmental agency goes like, we don't have the resources to defend a suit like that. We're stretched with our budgets and all this. So then suddenly it's turned around and the variances are granted. And then that sends a message to all the other cities or counties that even if you have a variance provision, you're going to have to give all those variances, or you're going to wind up spending a large part of the city or county's budget in court. And then the people in the community are not going to be happy because they don't get the services they expect because the money's going to the court. So even if you have the best set ordinance in place, you have to be very much aware that these variances can drive the ordinance in the ground and can have the impact of having the ordinance itself have little strength, because the variances will come in and get rid of all the good issues that you developed as part of the ordinances. Okay, so can we take questions?
Yeah, thank you.
And you spent all your talk talking about how bad it's going to hurt us and what chemicals there are. The deal is that companies about how they should make their wells safe. You didn't present any recommendations about how you make wells drilling, fracking safe. Why did you not?
You make the wells safer and you make the process safer by implementing regulations at the state level.
I'm not talking about laws and regulations, I'm talking about digging the things and how you build them so they don't have all this flow back, etc. And you keep the crap down below an impermeable layer where it won't hit the groundwater at 1,000 feet.
The technology is such right now that you use the fracking fluid to go down and do the fracture. Some of it comes back, some of it doesn't. When they fracture frequently, it goes out of the zone that they were aiming
Well, then
for.
we need to improve how you drill it, not how you deal with what you bring back up. If we keep it down there, it would seem, then we
But
wouldn't have an issue.
the industry will only improve technology based on pressure from the community.
That's the problem.
And the community has to be willing to bring that pressure. And the communities that are already suffering as a result of the impacts of this are the ones who have the first-hand information about what's going on in their communities.
Well, isn't the real issue that Vice President Cheney precluded the
Right.
drilling companies, the fracking companies from releasing the chemicals and what's going down into the
Correct.
wells?
Correct.
Isn't
So
that the big deal here?
that was a big deal that we can't
still
find
is.
out what chemicals. And I do another presentation of there's a need for groundwater monitoring before a pad is started. So we know what's there before. We need to know what chemicals are used on that pad, and then we need to do monitoring long-term. And the industry's not happy with that as
Well,
well.
aren't they in New York and Pennsylvania now that they're starting to frack up in those areas, developing good drilling procedures to keep the stuff down?
Very slowly, yes. And I've been reviewing them because I've been working in those states
Yes.
with the community. Yeah. Okay.
I guess mine is a two-point. It's more of a practical question from the ordinance standpoint. First of all, are you aware of any ordinances that don't allow variances on setbacks? And the other is, if they all have to have variances written into them, do you know of any ordinances where criteria is specified in there so that you can evaluate when a variance can be granted, and it has to meet certain criteria, or the variance, wouldn't be granted?
Okay, so most ordinances and most rules and regs have something that allows you to get a variance. I mean, across the board,
So
not...
you don't know of any where they just say,
Said-
okay, it's 1,000 feet, no variance, period?
Right.
You're not aware of any?
And then I haven't seen any that have specific criteria for evaluating to grant a
But
variance.
that's possible. I mean,
It is
Denton
possible.
could very easily say,
Right.
okay, if we're going to allow a variance, then we're going to have these 5 or 6
Mhm.
pieces of information that would, that we could evaluate to make our decision, and if it doesn't meet these criteria, then we're not going to grant the variance, and that could help the city make
Right.
sure they don't get into a legal fight.
But it still always winds back up at the legal fight, because even when you're
Yeah, but if
starting
you,
to
if
develop
you
the
write your
criteria.
ordinance so that if you set these very specific criteria that you would have to meet in order to get a variance, and if you can't meet those,
But there's still a variance to the variance. There's always a clause in there that you can go around the requirement to grant what's being requested. There's always that variance of the variance. It's never, this is the only conditions, and if you meet these conditions, you get it, and if you don't. There's always a mechanism to get a variance,
because
and
this
that's
is the
when you
big
want to
deal
enforce.
as to reducing exposure.
Sure.
Is making sure that the operations are far enough away from people that can be exposed. Obviously, the farther away you are, the lower the concentration you're exposed. And so making it very difficult to get variances and having setbacks that are very reasonable, should be the goal of any of these ordinances from the get-go, and to make it very difficult to get variances.
And that's how they start when the committee meets, and then the industry usually has enough influence that over the time of the life of the committee, it just sort of dwindles away. I've seen it happen over and over.
That's why I was hoping you could give us some positive examples of other cities that have.
No, you can put the best ones on the books, but with the variance in there, the industry always has the power and threatens suit, and then the local governments start backing up. That's reality.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I had a question about the process to some of your data collection on health risks. You had a list of different types of health risks that were associated based, I'm assuming, from a survey and questionnaire of people living near the vicinity of gas wells and stuff. So what is the statistical difference from someone who was living next to a gas well? What's that level of significance, or did you not do that? I just wanted, on a Douglas
Sure,
here, and
that's
I'm trying to get you.
And I mean, I gave a presentation similar to this in DC, where there was all the medical community there.
Yeah.
And I was the only one with data. They all are interested in it, but nobody has actually done the data.
Right.
So it's just been health surveys that
So
I've
there
developed
isn't
the
one yet.
instrument
Okay.
over the
Okay.
years, because I've been doing this like forever.
Okay.
And it's those health instruments that we do.
So there's not a survey where you had, okay, here's a listing of people that were in a certain range of a well site, and then another listing of similar characteristics of a community that wasn't near a well site, and you did it
And we're
comparative?
doing that now.
You're doing it now? Okay.
We're also developing one health instrument to be used across the United States. So we're in that process as well. We'll be
Okay.
using that for that.
All right, thanks.
Here you give a list of like health
A little bit
problems. You give a list of health problems here, health issues, and pretty much is there like a different solution than just talking of regulation and permits? Like, is there like a better solution
I mean, solutions like pollution
to
control
prevent it?
devices.
Yeah, to control it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of pollution control devices that can be implemented, but the response is always, well, that's too expensive. Yeah, and so if you don't go, because the oil and gas industry is somewhat exempt, and like he was talking about the Halliburton loophole and so on, they've always operated where they didn't have to be at the same level as chemical plants and refineries and things like that. So there was always a reluctance for them to be required, and they are already very reluctant to implement pollution control measures that are on the shelf, that are easy to purchase and put in place. But they only do what they're forced to do, and the state regs, like air emissions at a condensate tank or a compressor, it's a general permit. And all they have to do is fill out a one-page and say, these are the emissions we're going to have, and if it's under 25 tons of toxic chemicals, then they get the permit, and they have to report once a year. We release less than 25, and that's it. So it's that the government, and it's not regulating them as strictly as they regulate other sources. And in this case, with the shale gas, there's so many of these well pads and so many of the compressor stations, so many of the pipelines being put in, it comes in, and when you do a cumulative impact, it's huge. But everything's based on one little general permit, or permit by rule. I'll come back to you in a minute.
The creativity and technical innovation you speak of that's coming about in the industry as a result of regulations from government forcing the industry to get creative or come up with new innovations, are you seeing that as a result of local regulations at the city level, or are you seeing that at the state level type? What's being most effective in terms of what's pushing the industry towards this?
At the city level, it's based on if the community's really involved and the community's going into other communities and using impacts as an example. At the state level, it's very difficult to get changes in the regulations, and yet they don't want the feds to regulate them. They want the state to regulate them because they feel they have a lot more control over the state legislature and the state regulatory agencies. And so what you get is the best you can get with the political power that the industry exerts.
But are they responding? I guess my question is, when you see some companies heading towards water recycling in certain states, for instance, is that a result of local pressure at the city level that they're feeling like our hands are tied, we got to innovate in this direction? Or is it at a state level? Where is that becoming most effective to push the industry in a certain direction?
So if you have a person who has a technology that recycles water,
Right.
if that person sees a wide open market, but then they go into the state agencies and they go into the oil and try and sell their product, and they find out that unless it is absolutely regulatorily required, the companies are not being forced to use them, so they can set up the best game in town, and nobody's going to use it.
Gotcha.
And this is in all the share gas areas.
Right.
Okay?
So it sounds like the pressure's really coming from grassroots and moving upward versus top to bottom is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and it's only as good as the grassroots pressure.
Yeah, so the more pressure we give, the more likely the state may change. But I had another question about methods, just for me. You had setbacks between 50 feet and 2 miles, and you gave a listing again of health
Right.
effects. Was there kind of a trending of, or percentage of how many of them were really close, how many of them were 2 miles? Because that's a pretty huge,
Yeah, the worst ones are
Disparity.
closest, but yeah, you're still picking up the impacts out.
so there were some at up to 2 miles, but
Yeah.
not necessarily a higher percentage.
Right.
Can I just say something about distance?
Yeah.
In Argyle and Bartonville, which is one of the best examples that we have, they did baseline testing when there was just a little bit of drilling in Argyle and Bartonville. And they got 7 detects of the 84 chemicals that TCEQ commonly tests for. Later, when drilling was very advanced, they got 65 detects on the lot where the high school band practices, and it was 1/2 mile from the facility. So that tells you that 1/2 mile is not far enough away. And there is not, I've asked many scientists, what is the additional risk to those children when they go from breathing 7 chemicals to breathing 65 chemicals? No one can answer that.
No, there's not a data source yet,
No.
that's the problem, yeah.
But the children were having a lot of health impacts. In fact, it was reported on by the Denton Record Chronicle.
Yeah, they did a really good report on that.
I guess I have 2 questions.
Wait, you want to start off?
When I have everybody staring at me, my voice tends to get small. I guess, so what I'm gathering is the state regulations really not doing too much because of the lack of funds to fight against big business with their financial standing in it. So you're saying that it needs to go further, like for federal regulation, but I thought there's like, I mean, I may sound very ignorant, but I thought the Clean Air Act also had like regulations in the federal level for industries, you know, weapons.
Sure.
Or,
Yeah, there's Clean Air Act, there's Clean Water Act at the federal level, and EPA right now is doing a big study to determine if there's a correlation to groundwater contamination, so that fracking. But the issue is that most of the oil and gas is exempt from those federal regulations. And in order to change a federal regulation, you have to have a lot of power. So the best chance is to change regulations at the state, and more importantly, to change them at the local level. Because we've worked at the national level trying to get rules and regs changed for a long time.
I know, but I know how you concluded that PowerPoint was, it kind of sounds a little depressing because you said that, you know.
It is depressing. In reality, out there in the field, it is depressing.
Well, because you said that, you know, with state and local, you really can't do anything because of the funds to be able to fight against court. So why wouldn't you pursue in the federal where it's been those areas?
You have the best chance of fighting at the local and state level. But yet, you still have to be available to get involved with the federal levels, because it's a message for the locals that you bring to the feds. It's the examples that you bring to the federal. So I testify in Congress a lot, and I bring the issues of what the community is suffering. You bring that to the table.
What are the gas drilling companies doing about the problems in the county? Are the gas drilling companies doing anything
Yes and no. If the community gets really involved and puts a lot of pressure on them, they will start operating better. And then as soon as things start quieting down, they'll go back to their regular operation. So it's up to the local people to keep the pressure up all the time. And you're coming up, and you're one of them that can bring pressure, and continue to bring pressure as you grow.
Are there any solutions that the dental companies are using to safely store vacuum pellets?
Can they safely store it? They store it in what are called frac tanks that have a vent, so it releases it into the air. They store it in a pit, and even if the pit is lined, a lot of times the line breaks and it contaminates groundwater. Or when we have 5 inches of rain, the pit overflows.
Is there a way that they're using to safely store them that's not affecting the air?
They could if they put it in tanks that they have vapor recovery, but that's too expensive because it's short term. They only frack in their mind for a short period of time, so it's not worth the investment. So those are our next citizens coming up. Okay.
I've been to just about every gas drilling meeting there's been in Denton in the last 2 years.
Cindy?
I said I've been to just about every meeting there's been about
Okay,
gas drilling in Denton in the last 2 years I've been
Okay.
there. And we've heard from time to time industry reps rattle their sabers about lawsuits or milder allusions made to the probability of lawsuits. My personal opinion is bring it on. And I'd like to know how often that has actually happened and how successful they've been.
Most of the time, the threat of it makes it go away, and then
The threat of it makes the concern at the local level go away, so the threat's effective.
the threats are very
The
effective.
threat itself is
Yeah.
well, maybe it won't be in Denton.
I hope not. It would be great. It would be absolutely wonderful.
Flower Mound has been sued and they won.
Yes.
Yeah,
They-
there are a few
I know about
communities that have
Farmington.
been sued, yeah. And South Lake hasn't been sued, but they've denied. So there are communities that have denied.
Gray Prairie too.
Yeah.
They won a pipeline.
You're next.
So the more the communities really work together and share information, I think that's what this is really all about, the stronger they're going to be. Because then they will be able to say, look, it's not just me that said no, it's somebody else. It's not just a Flower Mound issue, it's a statewide issue. You know, it's not, and that'll give us more strength.
Okay, your turn.
All right, lady, in answer to this lady's question up here, Tip O'Neill once said, all politics is local. And it's very true. If you want to change this thing, the first thing you have to realize is that your local politicians are going to set local rules. At the state level, your state politicians are going to set the state rules. Rick Perry has appointed the people on the Railroad Commission of Texas, and they're people that are pro-gas and oil. So they're going to pass laws and rules that benefit industry at the detriment of the general public. The way we change that is by changing our political system, and the way we do that is by people being involved. It's nice that we get together here and talk, but unless you do more outside this room, unless you talk to all your friends and neighbors and motivate them and get a major grassroots organization going in the local level, you'll never affect any real change. It'll be just a bunch of people complaining about things.
Can I respond?
I was just wondering how aware and sensitive to the issue do you think the medical community is? I'll tell you why I'm asking. I have a little boy, and in Denton we have a gastro right across from a playground, McKenna Park in the neighborhood. I used to take him there all the time, and one summer he developed a rash on the side of his body. I tried all sorts of creams, I tried everything. Eventually I took him to the pediatrician who's right across from the gas well, near the hospital. And I said, what do you think that is? And she said, did you change your laundry? Did you change anything, your detergent? And I said, I haven't changed a thing. I just said, would it have anything to do with the gas well? Because he liked to go there all the time, and I didn't realize that. That's pretty innocent. And she laughed very uncomfortably and didn't say much more. And then I realized that, are there lots of people going there? Are we putting 2 and 2 together? Because the moment I put cortisone on it and stopped going to the park, it went away.
So the medical community is not very well informed, but it's up to the local people to bring that message, to talk before the medical board and things like that. What I've found across the board, not just with shale, and we're having this problem with the BP spill because none of the doctors want to treat the patients simpler because they don't want to have to make the connection and they get drug in court and depositions and all that. And also those doctors frequently are the medical provider to the company, so they do pre-employment physicals and things like that. And they see the potential of losing that whole patient base. But at like Superfund sites that I work with the community, we're able to get the specialists that know the chemicals at that site and that know the health impacts to come in and do workshops for the doctors, grand rounds with the doctors, and be a consultant available to the doctors. So the doctor can call up and say, this is what I'm seeing, how do I treat it? Is it associated with this? Where do I go from here? And so over time, you start getting that message. I do a lot of briefings to like low-income clinics and make the clinicians aware that when you see 5 people with a nosebleed today, start asking the question, why am I seeing these? What are they being exposed to? And just when I get them up to the point of, quote, paying attention, then they transfer into another clinic. And then I have to start all over again. I'm doing a workshop in 2 weeks for the new clinicians that are coming into this clinic. So it's an ongoing process, but yet you need to involve them because they're the ones that can make a big difference if you can get them engaged.
On that well at McKenna Park, Kathy McMullen got a letter signed by 80 doctors in that hospital asking the Denton City Council not to permit that well and put it there. And it got permitted anyway.
But don't stop there. Keep educating them so that the next time they speak up. And they might go to other communities and speak up. That's what it is, like you said. It's like
Well, actually, when the mayor of Dish came to speak here and brought up the nosebleeds, I realized my child had nosebleeds too, but I didn't make the connection. Because, you know, kids get nosebleeds, so you don't jump to conclusions, but it was during the same period. So that's when I'm starting to wonder, is anyone talking to anyone? Are we putting all this data together?
So get in touch with Sharon, she's putting a lot of this data together.
And over 200 doctors in New York State signed a really impressive public letter to the governor about health impacts.
Yeah.
They were able to get a brief on it.
Make some statements about the credibility of citizen groups. I mean, I've worked on legislation at both the local and state level. I've worked on giving technical testimony just like you have. And what I've found is that when you use overgeneralized statements, not you particularly, I know that the group you're talking to here, you're using very general statements on a lot of the things here. But politicians, when they're looking at groups and what kind of credibility they have in the comments they're giving, if they just hear a lot of complaining and the information has inaccuracies in it or isn't stated from independent studies, because you have to realize that who you're dealing with on the other side of an issue is an industry that has a huge amount of money. They've spent a great deal of money. They want to bring that technical expertise. They want to make all the politicians clearly understand that they have gone out and they've done the studies and they can have this detail that they can go. And then on the other side, you have citizen groups that complain a lot and make way over generalized statements, not be able to support a lot of the suppositions. And so as they weigh this back and forth and the possibility of going to a lawsuit, they're going, hey, we like getting citizen input, but geez, will you guys get your act together and go out, find the independent studies, find the specific data, put it together in your rationales, your reasoning. When you make recommendations, state all the reasons why you're making the recommendations and have a lot of technical background to it, not just we think it needs to be this. If you want to set a 750-foot setback as opposed to 1,000, don't just say we want 750 because we want 1,000 because that's farther away than 750. Look at air dispersion data. You know, what is as you're getting away from the well, how do the levels of concentrations drop off? If you want vents, if you want air pollution control equipment on the vents of condensate tanks, then find out for the companies that have already put that in, how much does that cut back on the emissions, and what was the cost of that in relation to the amount of money they're making from the well? What is the economic impact? and because I see this over and over again with citizen groups, is that they just don't have, good, solid, defensible technical information.
They don't have the funding, that's why.
It's not that it doesn't exist, it's that they don't spend the time and effort to go out and pull a lot of that together. Because there are air dispersion data modeling, there's cost estimates on what equipment costs, and you have to pull it together if you're going to have the credibility that you need. You know this, you're on the committee, you've been in the oil and gas industry for a long time.
There. Just the other day, 3 of our city council people in Dallas who are very definitely on our side just flat told us that when we go to the city council to make a presentation, it better be quick bullet points, not too detailed, because these people aren't very astute and they don't comprehend all that technical stuff. So a lot of the time when you do that, you have just wasted your effort trying to make a sales pitch to people that can't understand the point you're trying to make.
Well, that's the only way that you're going to be able to offset the industry with all their data and all their technical expertise.
Unless you have massive numbers of people that are voters.
Well, yeah, you'd have to have massive numbers of people. But I've seen citizen groups over and over again incorrectly state information, and then they get called on it when they go to the council or go to staff, and now the industry can just pick them apart and make them look stupid because they make statements that aren't accurate, and they lose their credibility. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I see what you're saying, but we don't have the time for that. I'm a full-time student, like I work,
I'm just telling you reality.
Right, I get you. That is the reality though, is all of this is like, you work 40 hours a week and you come home and you do your thing, and it's like, should I have to take up another full-time job and to do environmental impact assessments so that a gas industry doesn't come kill me? In my sleep? Why is the burden of proof like that? But that's my thing, is we're sitting here and we're all working so hard to try and keep them from hurting us. And it's no, I don't think they should be able to come here and do this unless they can prove that it's safe. And I do see what you're saying, and maybe that sounds idealistic, but I think the major flaw here is the burden of proof is turned around.
Yeah, and what he was talking about, we do when we have permit applications, and we look at all the dispersion mountains, and we have that. But again, we're looking at a specific permit for a facility that has specific emissions that provide that information, and then you can tell whether the technology is appropriate. But this is reality. This is what we're all up against.
Well, I think too, the industry kind of is, everybody assumes that they're telling you the truth and that their facts are really facts. And yet people are getting sick, and people are groundwater is being polluted, and those things are happening, even though the citizen groups can't exactly prove it because they don't have the scientists behind them or the money. Yet the industry has the money and all this scientific information, but that their information doesn't match the fact that people are getting sick.
Yeah. But they're going to say that if you live downwind of a multi-pump gas station, what are the air emissions coming out when people are fueling up all these cars, and you've got people working there or in the houses that are real close to multi-pump gas stations? What is their exposure related to a gas well? What are they experiencing? And you're saying, okay, well, let's do some comparisons in here and find out, are people being exposed from that?
Who can afford the fact that we're being exposed to some things doesn't mean we ought to allow more exposure to other things.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm indicating is that studies are out there, and the correlations are difficult from a health standpoint, because we're exposed across the board every day at work, when we're driving, when we're filling up our cars. We're exposed to volatile organic compounds in other settings besides being downwind of a gas well. And so being able to identify that was the cause of it, unless those numbers are really high and are significantly over the short or long-term health exposure levels set by TCEQ or EPA, it's going to be difficult unless you've got independent health studies that show that.
Well, that's what the SMU study did, that Al Armendariz did before he went to EPA. It showed that there's more VOC and NOx pollution in the Barnett Shale from gas drilling than there is from all automobile traffic in the DFW metro area combined.
It was about the same, but yeah, right, exactly.
Okay, so it's her turn. She's been waiting patiently.
I want to respond to the grassroots because I agree with you that the citizens have to be prepared. And in Dallas, I'm from Dallas, the gas drilling task force was developed, and we developed a shadow task force of citizens to have just what you're saying is the data. And we had one whole meeting that we were allowed to make presentations from our experts, and everything we did we wanted to be grounded in fact. And what shocked me as a citizen is what the operation of the task force was that it came down to gas industry representatives saying, well, I personally have a problem with this, or I really don't think this is going to work. Never, almost never, ever cited any kind of fact on their side. And yet all the public hearings, the 2 public hearings with hundreds of people was dismissed, and the shadow task force, it all came down to a very politicized situation where the city-appointed chairperson let the gas industry have their way, so much so that they reversed the previous setback that gas task force had developed to make it more to the gas industry liking. So it was really the city in Dallas and the task force that came up with the ordinance in the very last 2 meetings out of 22 meetings that were held.
Frustrating.
Frustrating. So the point being is we do need to have to go the next step and figure out how we can counteract that, because we went from informed citizenry to this situation, so we just need to be smarter for the next time around.
Well, you've got costs associated with all these different measures that can be taken. And some of them make a lot more sense from a cost standpoint, but with natural gas prices so low, and they're not really making money on wells unless the gas volumes are very large, then they're already losing money on a bunch of the wells and having to close some of them down. You need, if you're going to, you have to hit the sweet spots. You have to find out, if it turns out that air pollution control on the condensate vent tanks gets you the biggest bang for the buck, that's going to get you the largest reduction in emissions day in and day out after the drilling and the completions are over and done with and they run off and they have the Christmas tree there. Find out what the costs are associated for putting air pollution control equipment and condensate systems on those tanks in relation to...
We know that. We presented that. They ignore it. They say, Ed Ireland says, but we don't need it here because this is dry gas, or we can't use it here because this is dry gas. There's always a way to combat it, and it's political pressure. But what we have the information, but there is very limited scientific information out there. The science to prove that this is safe, that they can do it in communities, it does not exist. Right. Yeah, the industry comes up with data. It is not independent, it is not peer-reviewed data. It's their data and it's skewed. And we don't have access to the data. In many, many cases, the data gets buried by non-disclosure agreements that what happened there can never be shared again. We miss that science. We flat do not have the science. Yeah, there's been a couple of dispersion modelings done, not nearly enough, and we did the methane, Picaro methane survey, where we found for 5 miles out, we tracked methane from a facility in Flower Mound. So we know that it was dispersing for 5 miles on that night. But we don't have the science. The studies that you're talking about, they really don't exist. If they exist, Wilma would know about them, I would know about them. They don't exist.
We got time for one more question.
One more question. Wait, the little one in the back.
Well, mine is more of a comment.
Hang in there, we're going to get you.
Oh, okay, that might be better.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Do the comment and then we'll get her question.
You get the comment.
Go ahead.
Well, I asked council, I asked the mayor to review the gas well ordinance back in 2008. I've been very involved as a citizen in the process. I see what's happening up there in the state of Pennsylvania, passing their 13, that law that basically takes away all the civil rights of the Pennsylvanians, and they have made it into a corporate state, that is the industry corporate state, with regard to gas well drilling. The gas well drilling provides jobs and money to your local government, your state government, and your federal government. And, you know, it also provides to other governments because these are individual corporations that are profitable, very profitable, and make a lot of money, and they have the ability to make more and more money. Okay? There is no regulation of them, in essence. In fact, I proposed a very strange idea, which, of course, I'm surprised somebody hasn't shot me, in that I think that the gas and oil companies should all be regulated. Now, let me tell you something. Everybody thinks I'm a Democrat. I have been a lifelong Republican, okay? Now, the Republican would say, protect the states' rights and forget the EPA. Do away with the EPA. Well, now we're in a situation, as up in Pennsylvania and maybe here, where the state is starting to take away the local people's rights, okay? And if you're a Republican, you should be against that. But you're for it because you know why? Because money runs it all. So the answer is one of two things. Do like Mitzi did, sell her house and move the heck away. Just watch out where you're moving near, okay? Or vote them out.
It's got to be
I'd like to do both.
Okay, last question from the young citizen in the back.
I was wondering, if you were the gas drilling companies and you were being pressurized by a whole bunch of people, you probably wouldn't want to give them all your information, would you?
We'll sue you.
In their defense, even though I'm not really with them, I have to say that it's pretty smart not giving them information.
Yeah, they hold back a lot.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. So remember that. So thank you all very much for coming.